Now, to the book. I'm still going to read this book, and I'm going to give you my impressions, try to highlight some of the aspects of the chapter for you. This is not a pressure to. I guess what I'm asking is, white people, just give ear, listen to, consider the arguments that are made out here. This does not mean that this person is absolutely right and that your opinions at all are absolutely wrong. I read something Ernie sent me this week from one of our Native Americans in the area who was writing a balanced piece. And just because these voices are getting heard right now doesn't mean that your voice is not being heard. But it's time, it's a season where we listen more than we talk. And so I'm not interested in pursuing countermeasures or counter arguments at this point. I'm not interested in comparing this book to the Black Lives Matter movement or the people that run it or any of the bad actors in that movement. Not going to go there. I don't have time, and I really can't spend all of my time countering the kinds of arguments that are there. If you want to have those discussions on Facebook, then do that as well. But I am encouraging you to listen to what the author has to say. Again, I tell you, that doesn't mean that you agree with it. Just listen. So getting back to, I had to stop in the middle of chapter 2 last week because it was fairly long, and here we're getting into a discussion of white supremacy and what the author thinks this means and would like us to consider as a definition and understanding of white supremacy. Because when we hear the word, particularly for me in my rearing and where I come from, when I heard the word, I think of the really bad actors in this, the people who beat blacks at lunch counters, bomb children in black churches like what happened in Alabama, screaming at Ruby Bridges, and we've had some other videos come out just recently over the 4th of July where people are attacking this black individual and hurling these epithets. The bad actors amongst us. No, we also think of she says, the self-described alt-white, white nationalists that marched in Virginia. They carried torches. They shouted blood and soil. They were there to protest the removal of Confederate war memorials, but they were very overt, outward in their white supremacy concepts. Most whites, and this is the admission of the author, most whites do not identify with these images of white supremacists. And so, obviously, I don't think you nor I nor any of us in this community would. Now, white supremacy, though, goes wider and deeper than that. It's an assumed superiority of people defined and perceived as white. There is a sense where I can understand white supremacy as dominant in the word of supremacy, meaning dominant, carrying the bulk of the influence, the bulk of the power, the bulk of the resources. That kind of white supremacy is what she would rather have us consider. She goes on to say racism is a structure, not just a single or individual series of events. So racism exists in many cultures, and they're based on different things in different areas. I call your attention to the fact that it was a racial issue that had one of my co-workers or co-students at IWS murdered. He and his pregnant wife were murdered because of this kind of tribal dispute in the area of Africa. Both groups are black. Remember the Hutus and the Tutsis, both of which are black, but there was a great slaughter of one group by the other because of racism. Understand that. But for us in the United States, the author wants us to kind of understand a few things and listen carefully. The United States is a global power. We have great influence in the world through movies, mass media, corporate culture, advertising, manufacturing, military presence, and our historical colonial relations over the years. Our missionary work, even. And I told you I was cautioned about missionary work went way too far. It was not selling Jesus, trying to get Jesus into people, but trying to get white colonial culture into people. It was a difference that we had to learn to distinguish. This powerful ideology then ends up promoting the idea of whiteness as an ideal. That's the crux of the argument here when we think about supremacy. There's a racial contract that the peoples of Europe, the colonial powers, have been promoting and asserting and carrying with them wherever they go, to Africa, to India, to South America, even Spain, Britain, the Dutch, the French, and the American, as a result of being dominated by those European cultures. So it shaped Western political thought, she says, for hundreds of years. And one of the struggles that she's saying we're having discussing this is that white supremacy has a great deal of power in its invisibility. She says it's not in the forefront of our thinking, it's invisible. What does she mean? Well, that's part of the definition of white fragility. White supremacy is never openly acknowledged, admitted to, recognized even by us. And so she's trying to get us to come to a greater reconciliation of its existence. So the failure to acknowledge that white culture has been supreme in many areas of colonial world means that it's being protected from examination because we refuse to see it. That's the argument. Then she begins to bring us some facts and figures that she'd like us to consider. These are numbers from 2016, 2017 that she'd like us to look at. She pronounces the 10 richest Americans are 100% white. 7 of them are among the 10 richest in the world. Now this is again 2016, 2017 numbers. The U.S. Congress, 90% white. Now that's beginning to change, but it's, I wonder, she doesn't give the percentage of male over female either. U.S. governors, 90% white. Top military advisors, 100% white. At 2016, 2017, president and vice president, 100% white. Obviously, there's an exception to that before, but the rest of our history is white. Then she goes on to name some other things within the government. But listen to this one. The people who decide which TV shows we see, 93% white. People who decide which books we read, 90% white. People who decide which news is covered, 85% white. People who decide which music is produced, 95% white. Again, we're experiencing a change in this because of the pure democracy of the internet out there. We have the left-wing extreme, the right-wing extreme, and that's why I'm a candidate for critical thinking. Being able to look honestly at ourselves in the mirror and being able to look at these areas. There are right-wing extremists who give us only what they want us to see, and left-wing extreme who give us only what they want us to see. Our job is to be critical of both. Then it talks about the top grossing films of all time, 90% white. Those are the people who directed them. Oscar so white was a trend in the past. Full-time college professors, 84% white. And this one's powerful. The owners of men's professional football teams, 97% white. Now, these numbers are not a matter of good people versus bad people. That's not what she's saying. But they do represent power and control by whites, by white people who grow up in a colonial culture and who are raised in, we swim in it. Does that make sense? We have our own self-image, worldview, and interest, and it permeates the entire society. That's the point she's trying to make. In the new term, in the new way we're coming to things, the true white supremacist in the purest negative form of the word had to learn that they couldn't use certain language anymore. They've become more sophisticated in their messaging. And so now they are referred to as white nationalists. They wanted to distance themselves from the words racist and the words, the title white supremacy. So now they're the alt-white or the white nationalist. And she carries on a lot of talk about that. But you know now that there are words that that will cause you a great deal of trouble if you say them. And I know we've had times where we're like, I don't know what to say anymore. I understand your frustration with that, but that does not forgive our use of certain key words. It used to be common in white circles to say, I will Jew them down. The N-word was carelessly and freely thrown about in households, and now only in private family gatherings you might still hear it. But what she's saying is that subconsciously it's getting that abstract and coded messaging that's coming through now. It's not so blatant, not so easy to recognize. It is more abstract, it is more coded. So now we understand that we might not refer to ourselves as white supremacists, but we would say that we operate in a white norm. So the definition of whites as the norm or the standard for humanity then implicitly says that it designates and pushes out there the idea that people of color are a deviation from that norm. You see that? That's the struggle. So if we can name it, if we can visually look at it, examine it honestly, it changes the conversation in two key ways. The system becomes more visible. We can see where those issues lie, and it shifts the locus of change, and that the pressure or the impetus for doing something over to the white people. If we are indeed dominant in the culture, then we need to be part of the solution. And again, as I've trying to say, you can't just say I'm not racist. You've got to think about what does it mean to be anti-racist, to move past this fish tank that we're swimming in and get beyond it. And the second thing is that there, and she's saying a lot of this work is uniquely ours. So I'm noticing the signs that says silence is violence. For us not to do anything, or us to, at the worst, be defensive and point fingers at all the bad actors on the other sides and think that somehow excuses us from our place and our position. I don't want to argue there. I don't want to go there. I want us to listen to what we can do. And she calls it a white racial frame of mind, frame of reference from which we operate. And so it comes to us accepting that whites have been viewed as superior in our culture and achievement, and therefore we need to think about how that has looked over the years. The frame is both includes a negative understanding of people of colors and a positive understanding of white institutions, white culture as being positive. So she goes back to these ideas of looking at Disney movies, Song of the South, and some other things. And Walt Disney has some skeletons in his closet about his anti-Semite standings and some other things. And the people of that day just did these things because they were blind to it in many ways. Music videos, sports heroes, Chinese food, Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, the Taco Bell Chihuahua, celebrating Columbus Day as the day he discovered America. There were people here. Apu from the Simpsons. We're becoming more sensitive to this now. We can maybe claim a blindness to it in the past, but Let's not continue in that vein. That's not going to make things better. Even the donkey from Shrek came up for criticism. Now, you may not agree with all these and say how harmless, but it's not harmless. What they're saying is that it's part of the dominance of white culture over other cultures that keep us from doing that, keep us from moving forward and getting over this. I remember being segregated in the schools, and I know the resistance that happened with that. My parents, poor though they were, would sat me down and said, do you want to go to the private school? And I knew it was being created specifically for the purpose of segregation, to keep us segregated. Now, again, we've made great strides away from that, and I see people of color in white Christian schools and in other schools as well. But there is the idea of tokenism we have to consider. What is the ratio there? Is it just so we can say, well, yeah, we have ethnic diversity because there are 80 of us and 20 of them, or 97 of us and 3 of them, 4 of them. So we have to think about that and be sensitive to it. What about geography? Who lives predominantly in the neighborhoods where we live? And I think you can easily say that in the neighborhoods where we live, if they're affluent at all, they're going to dominate white culture as other than black. And there'll be those exceptions, but they are truly the exceptions. Race is encoded in geography, and it's part of the evidence I think they show us that is hard to ignore. The other thing about white supremacy in this conversation is that it's clear to us that we don't really talk openly about race. If a child in a supermarket says, "Mommy, that man is black," it's not the same as saying that man's in a wheelchair or that man doesn't have a hand. Why do we find it embarrassing that we say the person is black? She says, would we feel that way if the child said, "Mommy, that person is white"? Not if the whites are the dominant culture. So that's one of the things that we have to think about in the white frame that we live and work and talk in. So children learn it's taboo to openly talk about race. What do you think about that? Do you feel that way? Is it an awkward conversation? Do adults drop their voices when they say that this person was black? There are many times that people are described as black, and I've read this in Facebook posts, that they're describing the person as being tall or skinny or this or that, but there's no reason to name them by their color. And you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't say my white friend or this white person came in. But if it's a black person, we would tend to do that. That this black individual came in and blah, blah, blah happened. If we're going to get past this, we're going to have to understand this frame. All the comments we make about people of color or people other than us privately need to be considered as part of our white domination within this culture. That's the point of trying to understand white supremacy not as this horrible evil thing, but this subtle underlying context of everything we live in and we do. All right.